First of all, let's talk about the video communication system of today. And I'll show you some variations of this, but the basic idea is videos are captured out in the world, processed, passed through a channel. And these days, that channel may go to social apps, which are then sent through more processing and then to the receiver, typically over the internet these days. In every stage of this, there are sources of distortion. There are sources of distortion when you capture, when you process, when you send it across the channel, of course, and even the social apps do a lot of processing of your pictures and videos, creating new distortions. Typically, compression is one of the biggest distortions they introduce. So all the way along the line, there are distortions that are introduced even in our brain where things like neural noise occur and imperfections of our vision system, the lens, and so on. Now, you'll notice at the end, as I point out the natural video receiver and the natural video transmitter, this is particular to video communication. It's unlike, the antenna in a classical communication system that you might find at either ends. We're going to model both of these, and that's how we're going to attempt to solve video quality problems. So what do I mean by the natural video transmitter before we get into any of the math models? Well, I mean the world of photons being reflected off of objects captured by cameras and sensed on a sensor, a photoreceptor, or your own retina. This includes, of course, pictures and videos of all types. I'll just mention that I'm not talking too much about computer graphics here. Actually, the things we're doing are applicable to computer graphics. We're working with Facebook on some graphical stuff now, but let's assume that everything's optical because there are instances where they don't apply. So the natural receiver, well, it's the human eye, but it's more than that. It's what happens behind the eye. For example, in the back of the retina. This is a cutaway cartoon of the retina, and what you'll see here are various cells in the retina, including the photoreceptors. These are the rods and the cones. You may not have known that light passes through the whole retina before it reaches them, but this is all transparent effectively. What you'll notice here are what are called ganglion cells. Ganglion cells we will model shortly as two-dimensional linear filters, which can be analyzed under linear systems theory. They're fed by some other cells, including horizontal cells and bipolar cells and so on, creating responses that we have accurate models for and will use today. And not only will we study the retina, we'll talk about the lateral geniculate nucleus. The optic nerve passes the signal directly from those ganglion cells to LGN, and then on through the optic radiations to the rear of the brain in the back of your head, where primary visual cortex is located. And I'll talk about modeling there. We also use models in other areas of the brain that emanate from primary cortex, even including higher in the occipital lobe. But today I'll restrict it to these three centers. They're enough to do a lot as far as video quality. Now, this visual pathway in the brain, as we will see and discuss, is largely devoted to a form of video compression. We didn't invent video compression. Evolution did. And the reason why is because if the brain from the very beginning, right at the retina, didn't represent visual signals extremely efficiently, we would have brains the size, big enough to carry in wheelbarrows at least. So video quality, that's something I specialize in. I should say perceptual video quality, meaning quality as viewed by humans. We want to predict what a human would say is the quality of a picture or a video. I'm going to say right off that the hardest kind of video quality prediction is what's called user-generated content today. I'll talk about other kinds as well, but this is where the hot research is at right now. User-generated content, meaning the kind of things that people upload to social media, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, etc. And the reason why it's hot is because it's a very hard problem. There's so many different kinds of distortions that can occur with different severities, and you can have multiple distortions. Well, let me just show you an example. Actually, I like this picture a lot. I mean, this is kind of an exciting picture. If I'd taken it with my friends, I would keep this forever. But you have to admit it's severely distorted. You might ask yourself, how many distortions can you find? Even you don't have to be an expert to realize there's a lot going on, but I'll make a list that I did a quick count of. Different kinds of blur, over and underexposure, compression artifacts, jitter. You can look at the jittery eyes and so on, color errors, a lot of different things. And more importantly, combinations of all these where pixels are regions are afflicted by multiple of these all at once. I have to tell you, I've been working in this area for decades now. There are no really good models of any of these, not even blur really, because blur can be so diverse. There's an infinite number of possible blurs that can affect a picture or a video. So it's very difficult to model or anticipate. So what do? This is a short list. Here's another video. Is this a good quality video? Well, hey, what's that guy? Ah, that's Bigfoot. You may not have heard of Bigfoot, but he's a legendary creature who lives in Canada. And this is the only video, and therefore the best video ever taken of Bigfoot. Yet it's horrible in every objective way. Here's some more errors that can occur. Some we could classify as mostly spatial, afflicting frames where you can just see it. Other ones you only see if the video is playing. They have a temporal or a time aspect of them. And this is just a short list of both. And there's many, many, many more. And they can again all combine into new distortions that you have no hope of actually modeling in some generic way. And I bring this up because I didn't invent video quality modeling. People tried to study this for many years. And the approach that was usually taken was, let's form a mathematical model of optical blur or motion blur or whatever, okay? And these worked a little bit, but not very well. The models I'll talk about today don't try to model any of these specifically, but work better than any distortion-specific models on any of these distortions. Okay, so again, it's really hard. Just all these distortions, the way it interacts with content and with other distortions. And we also have to account for how the human visual system works as well. That has to be modeled too, because it affects all of this. So it's an amazingly hard problem. Can we even do it? Well, the answer I'm going to say is yes. The main reason we can do it is because videos are very special signals. How are they special? What do I mean by that? Secondly, because distortion changes that specialness, and we can measure that change of specialness, okay? Or you're wondering, what does he mean by specialness? Do we have an equation for that? Well, I'm going to talk about several ways in which videos are very special. One of which you may have heard of. It's typically called the 1/f law, where f is frequency. To be more specific, if we take a video and if we take a Fourier transform of its frames, so this is spatial frequency, two-dimensional spatial frequency. I know some of you guys don't use Fourier transforms, but I'll try to, make these things, less obtuse for those that don't. But if you take the Fourier transform of many videos or even a single video, it tends to follow a reciprocal power law. Reciprocal power law. So if I square the transform, the expected value looks like a reciprocal law. And I'll show you some actual videos and their power spectrum, both in space, but also in spatial or temporal frequency. W is temporal frequency. So if we take a Fourier transform just along the time dimension, we observe the same thing. Well, why is that? Well, why is that is often hard to answer regarding the statistics of videos. But it does imply this reciprocal law implies a self-similarity property. Who discovered this? A fellow named Benoit Mandelbrot. You might remember he was the guy who popularized and sort of invented fractals, which are self-similar signals. It's important to us because things that are self-similar, it means that over different scales of observation, their properties hold up similarly. So if we analyze videos, we need to analyze them over multi-scale. The human brain over the eons has evolved in response to this self-similarity property, and human perception is manifestly multi-scale all along the visual pathway. So here's a couple videos. I'm going to show you this. This is from my class, actually. Here's the football video. This shows its spatial power spectrum. You can see this. Oh, this is on a log scale. So it should be a straight line. and it's pretty good, okay? This is the temporal frequency on a Fourier transform on a log scale. It's not perfect, you notice. I didn't say it was a perfect model. It's a pretty reliable model. The frequencies always fall off. How well they satisfy the model, varies a little bit from video to video. So the video is very active, but nevertheless, frame by frame and over time, pretty steady, pretty linear on a log scale. We don't actually use this model in the picture quality and video quality models I'm going to talk about, but it does motivate multi-scale. And it brings us to the next property, the sparsity property of pictures and videos. This was first revealed back in the 90s by a couple of vision scientists, Bruno Oschhausen and David Field. They, looked at things like Fourier transforms and principal components of pictures or video frames, and they wondered, what if we started to relax some of these constraints? Instead of using the same old orthogonal transforms as a criteria or applying any energy constraints, they said, what if we did something very open-ended? And we just said, suppose we try to find a set of basis functions and their coefficients which best represent a video, but subject to a different criteria. They said, what if we try to make something that's sparse? It was a brilliant realization. And of course, like a lot of brilliant realizations, other people were starting to think the same kind of thing. You may have heard of the lasso out of Stanford group, Tibshirani's group. So the idea here is if you use like an L1 norm or something like this, you can think of the objective function as being creased, and during the optimization, things roll down to the creases. And what that means is you get a lot of zero coefficients. A sparse representation, only a few basis functions needed. If you can even use many basis functions, create what's called an extremely overcomplete representation, and you may end up with even fewer that are part of the final representation. Now, what's interesting about it, when they did this, what kind of solutions did they get? Well, they found this kind of solution. The basis functions look like bandpass filters. You're going to hear me say the word bandpass about 100 times in this talk, because this is what the human visual system does too. These look remarkably like filters along the retinocortical pathway in the primary visual cortex, in LGN, if we take it along one dimension, something waving like this in one dimension, and in our visual retina, where they tend to be more circularly isotropic. Bandpass filters, and these also look like wavelets. In fact, they look a lot like what are called Gabor wavelets, and they look a lot like what the early layers of a deep network looks like, the weighting functions. Oh, I didn't mean to jump out. Okay, anyway, I'm done with that one anyway. Another famous result from back around that time. You've probably heard of principal components. People studied that. The principal components of pictures and videos weren't very interesting. They look basically like local sinusoids, which is kind of interesting, but not terribly so. After all, we had this enforced orthogonal constraint if you're looking at local PCA analysis. Now, Terry Sejnowski said, what if we use this new idea of independent components, where instead we try to force the basis functions and the filters to be independent? In other words, optimize something like a separability condition, which we can express in terms of pairwise mutual informations between the elements of the representation. What they discovered again was bandpass type signals. The vision system, in trying to find efficiencies when processing specifically video signals, evolved to these kinds of representations, these kinds of filters, okay? Not only in space, but also in space-time, okay? So, space and time, Hatter and Ruderman followed on Sejnowski's work and looked at videos. These are independent components. These are their inverses, meaning independent component filters, which is what you would practically apply if you're going to use these as filters. All of these look like bandpass filters in space-time. Okay, so just to summarize a little bit and what we know about what's in the vision system as well, I haven't shown you anything about the vision system in those last few slides. This is what visual signals look like if they are bandpass filtered. Well, what's happened is that the visual brain has evolved to extract similar efficient representations at the retina where bandpass predictive coding occurs using filters that look like this. I'll give a model of this in a little while. In LGN, we're temporal processing, bandpass and frequency, causal, of course. And in space, in visual cortex, looks like Gabor functions, which have very nice localization properties. Bandpass in space, DC in the middle there. This is a bank of Gabor filters. Looks a lot like the things that I showed you from those independent components and from the work by Field and Olshausen. Oh, forgot my arrows. There they are. Okay. Next special property. Now we're getting to things that are even more useful. At this point, we're going to do multi-scale. We're going to do bandpass processing of signals just to analyze them. I haven't even talked about distortions really yet. So another amazing property that was discovered even earlier is that the empirical density functions of videos or pictures that are bandpass filtered in space or time or both. So just take a video, bandpass filter it. Then if we plot the histogram or the empirical density, it can be very reliably modeled by a generalized Gaussian density function, what I'll call it a GGD. This was observed by Jerry Gibson, who used to work here in Texas at Texas, I forget that university up north in Dallas. He applied this to DCT coefficients, which have a bandpass interpretation. Later, the great wavelet theorist Stefan Malat observed this to be case for all the kinds of wavelets he was studying back then. And for all sorts of other kinds of bandpass filters, including the kind that we like to use in video processing and to model the visual brain. Typically, this coefficient, which is called the shape parameter, lies around the value of 1, but you see some variation. By the way, this is what generalized Gaussians look like. The values of beta that we usually see are less than 2. If beta is equal to 2, it's Gaussian, of course, the familiar curve. If you have beta values less, you get more and more heavy, so-called heavy-tailed density functions, which are very peaky as well near the origin. Heavy tail, very peaky. I forget if it's leptokurtic or platykurtic. I can't keep straight on that terminology, but very heavy-tailed. Here's a couple of videos again showing examples of this. This is the sled. It's going down the hill. This is again on a log scale, okay, of exponential, and you can see the dotted line is the true generalized Gaussian, whereas the empirical data is a close fit over all the frames. This is for 4 different kinds of bandpass filters. One is a retinal filter. One is a cortical filter or Gabor. One is another retinal filter called a difference of Gaussians. Doesn't matter what the specifics are. And this is yet another simplified version of the dog filter. Okay, so bandpass filter, it's just linear. You just small regions of each frame, you linearly combine, and that's your output at that point. That's what linear filter is. And these are just filters that only admit middle ranges of frequencies. Okay? If we look at another video, basketball, I'll just show it quickly. Same kind of thing. Why did it jump at the beginning? Because we have a scene break in between, and it kind of messes things up. But otherwise, very nice fit. Okay, this, if you take 1 million images or 1 million videos from 1 million cameras on 1 million points on Earth, it'll always be this. That's how reliable this model is. Okay, 5th property. This one's even more amazing. It's related to, but different from the generalized Gaussian model. It's called the Gaussian scale mixture model, or infinite mixture of Gaussians. It's sometimes known in the statistics literature. If we it's again a model of bandpass videos, and we'll see why we need both of these. It's a model of bandpass videos. So if we take a video and we bandpass filter it, then over either space or time or scale, if we form small neighborhoods, so a small piece of if you just draw a little circle on a picture, or you take a little video clip, or if you have a wavelet transform, multiple scales, you look at neighborhoods in any of those spaces or a combined space. If the video is of good quality, then it will be well modeled by the so-called Gaussian scale mixture, which is expressed as a product of two random fields. One is a scalar variance random field, and the other is basically Gaussian white noise. Gaussian white noise? Well, the implication here is that if I extract the scalar variance field, and our vision system does this, as I will soon describe, what you have left is Gaussian white noise. It's an amazing property of videos. And by the way, nobody really understands it yet. Okay, I'll talk more about it. What it does imply, though, is that if we can estimate this variance field, okay, maybe I can use the variance field for something like image analysis, kind of like computer vision, but in the brain, okay? Then what do you do with the rest of it? Is it useful? Well, my hypothesis is that, yeah, the vision system uses it to detect distortions, maybe to correct them. For example, the eye has to focus. Okay, so more on that. Just the statistics now. This is a general property of pictures and videos. People never believe it, okay? And then till they try, actually computing these things. If we have a Gaussian scale mixture, there's an easily expressed density, and we can actually form the maximum likelihood estimate of the multiplier scalar field in a simple way. Just extract the near orthogonal where the main diagonal is typically close to 1. This expression, if we have n bandpass coefficients, pretty easy to calculate. This is if we then divide the bandpass video by this quantity, or if we condition on it, if we're doing the math instead, forming expressions, we have effectively something close to Gaussian white noise. The Gaussian part, very accurate. The white part, a little bit less accurate. It's not quite perfectly decorrelated or whitened. But yes, you can do these things. You can attempt to do a lot of things with the variance field, and people have done some things. Okay, so this underlying Gaussianity is still a mystery of vision science. It's been studied by brilliant people. David Mumford, Field Prize winner, studied this for a long time. He published papers on these natural models, but he could never explain why the Gaussianity, okay? Even Francis Crick, who moved off from DNA analysis to study neuroscience, he wondered about this and talked about it in his publication. It's a mystery. A lot of people have, including my friend Eero Simoncelli, one of the great neuroscientists of our time, and the great statistician, I think at Stanford, Martin Wainwright. They were part of this work in developing this pretty simple model, but can't explain the Gaussianity. Nevertheless, the vision system expects it. It expects it. But for the purpose of the problem, solving the problem of video quality, well, if the video is distorted, it no longer obeys this Gaussian scale mixture model. It's altered by it. Distortions alter it. And that's great for us. Anyway, here's a couple of pictures. I thought I'd keep it static here so you could see it better. This shows processing after a bandpass filter, doesn't matter what, and after divisive normalization using an estimate of the variance field. It's superimposed on Gaussian, and here I'll click once more. You can see a dotted line is superimposed underneath. You get very excellent fits, very excellent fits. It's an amazing underlying property of the world, and it's not central limit theorem. We have some thoughts about the statistical principles that might be involved. Maybe it's not, it's really sort of a statistical physics of our natural world and how light is reflected from it and captured and projected onto sensors. Why, if we do bandpass filtering and normalize, does it look Gaussian? Well, it's a bit of a mystery. We have some ideas. If anybody has some statistics that wants to talk about it sometime, I'm happy to chat. Anyway, so the vision system is expecting this, and it does a divisive normalization. It divides the image signal by local energies to approximate that variance term. So if this is the output of one bandpass neuron, okay, neighboring neuron energies, which are like, variances, divide this. And this is an established model in vision science and visual neuroscience that was published long ago and is widely accepted, fits all the data. Okay? So the vision system does this kind of processing. It also, I should explain, this model of the brain explains a phenomena called contrast masking, which I'll show you in a minute. And it's a lot like normalization processes you see in deep networks now, things like layer normalization, but this is a little bit more localized. Here's a picture. It's been compressed with what's called JPEG. You'll notice there's all these compression artifacts. It's severely distorted, but that's funny. It's compressed just as much over here in the background. What's happened here is the content is perceptually masking the compression distortion. You have to account for that if you're going to try to predict quality. You have to know when the distortions can't be seen. This is really kind of an optical illusion. You just can't see it. It's there just as much as it is on the little girl's face, who happens to be my daughter. Okay, so now let's formulate some video quality paradigms by exploiting what is called the dual nature between natural video statistics and sensory processing. What I mean by that is the visual brain has evolved in response to the natural statistics of videos. The general idea is if we have a picture that is distorted in some way, if we apply the kind of perceptual processing that we've just done, then we suddenly have statistical models that we can deploy. And if the picture was good quality, we ought to get something that falls within a neighborhood of what we'll call Gaussianity. By the way, I'm only talking about Gaussianity right now. I've left out a lot. We can also talk about, two-dimensional or bivariate distributions. So bivariate Gaussians and things. We can talk about color models, which also are similar to these, and other things. So I'm keeping things simple right now, but it's all kind of similar to this. So again, we process something good quality, it falls within range of an ideal Gaussian, we might say, conceptually. If it's distorted, it falls further away. And that suggests that maybe we can predict quality by measuring some sort of statistical/perceptual distances of videos after our processing as compared to Gaussianity. In these days, boy, is it important. So if you're a social media user, you are a person who uploads videos maybe, okay, or pictures. Probably most of us who use social media do that, and a lot of those are terrible. Have you ever been on YouTube and watched videos? A lot of problems. So when you upload that, Facebook or Twitter or YouTube, they immediately start analyzing, processing, and compressing that video. They would be able to do all the tasks they do, such as like looking for faces for whatever reason, if they could know what the quality of the picture was. It's something they really want to be able to do. For example, if you knew the quality beforehand, it would help you decide the later compression, where you do a reference compression right here. Okay, so super important problem that could affect literally hundreds of billions of videos every year. This is what we're working on, and it's hard. I'm going to start with an older model just to continue this theme of natural scene statistics called BRISC. It uses the Gaussian scale mixture model. It uses a simple model of bandpass filtering and a simple model of divisive normalization. And it uses this underlying Gaussianity of the world. So this is all kind of review, just reminding you, but the filters that we use are simple. If this is a video frame, F, at every pixel, we just subtract the local average value. It's a weighted average, okay? Local average value. We do that everywhere. That's a bandpass filter. It's a very simple one. What filter we use? Well, something that has sort of a Gaussian shape. Then we divide by a local weighted standard deviation, which in vision science we call the root mean squared contrast. Root mean squared contrast. Okay? If we do that, we're divisive normalization with an actual estimate of that deviation. Right? In the simplest form, just sample statistics. The result, here's a picture. Here's the result of doing this, what we call MSCN, mean subtracted contrast normalized. This is its histogram. This is its histogram. Looks very Gaussian. When I say Gaussian, I don't mean perfect Gaussian. After all, this is biological glop we're talking about, processing a world that's infinitely complicated. Nevertheless, this process gives you a Gaussian, unless the picture is distorted. Furthermore, this has a strong decorrelating process. You can detect visually there's some residual correlation. I said the decorrelating property wasn't as strong as the Gaussianity property, but still it's a strong decorrelation. You can see that in these two-dimensional histograms where it's basically just plotting a pixel against its neighbor, pixel against its neighbor, if the two pixels are next to each other. You can see almost linear relationship, super strong correlation in a video before we apply this perceptual processing. Afterward, looks like white noise. Looks like white noise. If we take products of adjacent pixels, that's what I mean by x and x plus or minus 1, neighboring pixels, then they should be under this ideal, Gaussian white noise model. They should obey a symmetric density function. We also approximate this. This is continuous. It's not discrete like pictures. You got this little matter of infinity at the zero of a second of a modified Bessel function. Instead, we will, simplify the model. Okay, distortions. I've said they destroy the statistics. Here's our red Gaussian picture from the same one. If we apply a bunch of distortions, you can't read these, so I'll say what's the original. It's JPEG 2000 compression, JPEG, white noise, Gaussian blur, and a fast fading channel noise. You can see the histograms are destroyed even after MSCN. Even after MSCN. We can still try to model them, and we can do so pretty effectively as instead our old friend, the generalized Gaussian, here being applied differently. This time as a first-time general model of distorted pictures. And we regard this as a major contribution of ours. And furthermore, if we look at these products, instead of looking like this nice symmetric density, we get these slightly asymmetric densities. Why are they asymmetric? Because distortions introduce correlations typically, like blur, compression, and so on. So if we take products of values, they tend to have the same sign, positive or negative, and skew a little bit. We model this with what's called an asymmetric generalized Gaussian. So what I've just done right in front of you is really invent the model, because I can process videos this way, fit it with histograms, extract these features based on the fit, extract these features. We've got 2 univariate features, 4 distortion features, and we can do this in a few directions. These 4 features, we just use 4 orientations, keep things simple. That's 18 features under our Gaussian scale mixture model. We do this over 2 scales, meaning we do it on a frame, and then we downsample it, low pass downsample, and then we do it again, which gives us 36 features. We could use more frames, but at the time we just used a couple. Then we take all these features, we compute them on a large database of images, compute all the features. These images are supplied with human labels of quality, human judgments of quality, 25,000, which back then was a huge number. This was the first successful picture quality database back around 2004, which we used to train a learning machine, just an SVR. So we have a train model then, and it turns out that this train model does fantastically as compared to even reference models. It destroys the old model called PSNR, which has been used for a long time, and does almost as well as famous algorithms like multi-scale sim, which is also used throughout the television industry because it's so effective. Well, there's a little bit of a lie here, of course. These models aren't trained, so you don't have the benefit of, this optimization process. Secondly, this database is an old database. It's also an easy database because all the distortions are single. They're synthetically created. So we just generated, Gaussian white noise artificially, and distortion and blur and compression. This model, BRISC, doesn't do very well on user-generated content distortions. It's too simple. Nevertheless, it's used throughout the world. It's especially used in the cloud for transcoding of videos where you don't have a reference. But it doesn't do very well on this kind of YouTube, Facebook content. We've tried to beat that by creating advanced BRISC models, which have somewhere between dozens and even thousands of natural scene statistic features. We have one called VidiVal, which is, we started with some 3,000 features and winnowed them down to like the 60 best ones. And I'll talk about that too. It actually does pretty well. but it's a lot, to compute many, many features. All of these features, by the way, I don't really regard as handcrafted, as the word is sometimes used. These all derive from actual, visual neuroscience. Okay, so let's get into the deep video quality. Okay, so this is how we're attacking UGC now. This is a collaboration between our lab and Facebook AI Research Applications, who is funding us for the last few years. The first thing we did is we created a super large database of UGC videos, 40,000 of them, and 120,000 video patches extracted from them. I'll explain what those are in a minute. So basically 160,000 videos, which we showed on Amazon Turk to many, many humans. I forget that I should have recorded the number, but it was 10, 20,000 human subjects that participated and generated 5.5 million human judgments of these. We desperately needed to do this, and it cost a lot of money, some, $100,000 to do this, of time on Amazon Turk, because these kind of studies are much harder than something like an ImageNet. These are psychometric studies where each person looking at a video doesn't spend a half second, but has to look at it for a while, maybe 10 seconds. Okay. Like I said, we extract patches, and we got quality labels on those too. We showed patches to people. And what do I mean by patches? I'll show you in a second. Here's some examples of the content. This is real user-generated content that came from Facebook. Facebook randomly sampled their Facebook, I'll just call it a library. It's actually things that were uploaded by people. These are ones where we got approval to show you the pictures of them. You can see all kinds of distortions and so on. This is how the video patches were created. Okay. First of all, we have full videos, full spatial extent. Ignore the boxes for now. Full time extent. Spatial patches have full time duration. These were typically 7 to 10 seconds, but they're truncated in space. So it's a spatial patch. We also created temporal patches, which are full size in space, but then truncated in time, video clips. And finally, truncated in both space and time. Why do we care about all this? Why do we want these patches? Because we're very interested in the relationship between local quality and global quality. It's a very important relationship because distortions can be local, but affect global perception of quality. You got one little region that looks terrible, and the whole thing is spoiled for you. And so we'd like to be able to understand, at least through a deep network, those interactions. So I'll describe our latest work, which will appear at this year's CVPR. It's called Patch VQ or PVQ, patching up video quality. This is the basic PVQ model. It's got a couple of branches, one of which is really temporal. I should say space-time. The other is strictly spatial. For the space-time analysis, we use a ResNet 3D, which is a very powerful model. Like the visual processing that we talked about earlier. Remember I talked about how the vision system tries to extract efficient representations. Those representations are sparse, efficient, low redundancy, and low entropy representations. Well, this is what ResNet does as well, but localized basis between layers. So ResNet was no surprise to vision scientists or neuroscientists generally, but it sure is effective, isn't it? It's solving a lot of problems with deep nets. And of course, people have elaborated with dense nets and ResNext and things further along. Two-dimensional frames are processed. Well, what's this pack to pick? Well, last year we created a similar model like this, but just for still pictures, no videos, just pictures that don't change over time, like a photograph. And so we just plug this in. It has a similar architecture as the left branch, but without anything temporal. This is temporal. We use region of interest pooling. This is a basic method that comes from RCNNs, except simpler for us because we don't have to do much of the processing that's done in an RCNN. And similarly in the time direction, this is another sort of region of interest pooling, and I'll get into this in a second. All this space-time stuff ultimately forms a time series on which we perform a time series regression using an inception time module. Why do we do that? because spatial quality, well, we might capture it at a given point in space-time, it changes over time. It changes over time. Just think of the autofocus on your camera. It's, it's trying to, changing the focus, and the quality changes until it finds that right focus. Well, this happens all the time. It happens in networks, happens in YouTube videos, and all that. So, like I said, these two channels form time series, which we concatenate into a single time series of the 2D and the 3D. 3D means space-time, not anything in the third dimension of space. The inception time module, if you haven't seen it before, it's basically stacked inception modules. You feed your time series in. At the end, there's global average pooling, feeding fully connected networks. Maybe this isn't the best idea. I know fully connected stuff is going out the door these days, but this worked well for us. This really did work well. This shows a basic inception module. If you haven't seen those, it's like a deep net, except you have these parallel channels where you have a max pooling and one-by-one convolution to reduce channel dimensions. And this is the basic inception model that's used inside here. Okay. I mentioned the ROI pooling. This was first introduced in RCNNs, region CNNs. We use the faster RCNN model, but it's much simplified for us. The reason why is, well, this is a little diagram of RCNN. The basic idea is you're trying to find people. Okay, and so you have a network that learns how to decide where are the people. Okay, well, in our model, we know where everything is. We're the ones who decided in training where the patches are. I showed you how we did that. And then later in application, we'll decide, where we want to put the patches again, because of the way we do things. SOI is just a one-dimensional version of the same thing, really. Again, we don't need a segment, time segment proposal network. We know which video, where the start and the end is of the video clips during training, and we probably just use the whole clip during application. Okay, the only difference is that we use it with this model is we use average pooling, which is typical of regression problems like we're doing, as opposed to sort of computer vision classification problems. Okay, so I just mentioned this. The locations are known. We've got our database with 5.5 million judgments and tens of hundreds of thousands of videos. When we train, we know the locations. 4 of them, of course, the whole video and the 3 patches for every video. Our goal, of course, is to learn how to predict quality of the whole videos. And any number of patches, even though we only train on 4 patches at the input, the RCNN structure is wonderfully general and allows you to predict any number of patches afterward. Well, I'll tell you what we do for that in a little bit. Okay, so this just shows our training protocol. We're very careful about overlaps. And on the big database I mentioned, by the way, that database is a 1-hour talk to explain the whole thing. So that's why I kind of skimmed over it. We see the performance in terms of linear correlation coefficient. This means correlation with the human judgments, those 5.5 million human judgments. This is the so-called rank order, Spearman rank order correlation, measures monotonicity, agreement in terms of monotonicity. As you can see, BRISC doesn't do so well. The supercharged BRISC, where we distill down from thousands of features, does a lot better. Another model done around the same time as ours, but a different lab, called VSFA, uses a much deeper ResNet along with a GR, graded recurrent unit, which is like an LSTM. This shows our model on this database. This shows significant improvement of all these three over good old BRISC. This deep model is only a little bit better than VidiVal, which means we did a good job here. This amount of improvement of about 0.02, 0.03 is actually quite significant and could amount to billions of bits saved every year. This is regarded as an important increase. More importantly, when we apply this to another database where these 2 models were not trained, we train it on this database, tested it on an independent UGC database. We see a much larger difference between the various models. Okay, so we're very happy with this result, and it's because of this local to global modeling that we did. I'm almost done, by the way. The way we also applied this was to create a perceptual quality map predictor. All we do is, like I said, we can, back here I said, you can predict any number of patches. Okay, so we do that. We break our video by partitioning the frames into a grid of patches. Yes? Question? Okay. We partition frames into a grid of patches. This is arbitrary numbers just to show this principle of this new idea. And then we also break each video into clips of length 16 frames. Okay, and so we just apply this model, but with K being whatever 256 times the number of clips in this K value here, and we're able to produce spatial quality maps. I'll show you two kinds. In the first one, we just produce frame by frame quality. Okay, so if you can look at this, well, you can see the parrots are in focus. So bright means good quality. In the background, things are blurry. Dark means worse quality. Likewise, this region is nicely sharp. Okay, but both forward and backward, you start getting blur, and so you get lower quality. Here we have all kinds of distortions. On the person, we have like underexposure, low quality. Background, we have motion blur, low quality in most places. High quality only where the camera was tracking the motorcyclist very nicely. This shows applying it to a video. Okay, so here we are, the camera's focal plane is going through the hand, and so different parts are in focus once more. And so you can see the point of high quality changing over time as the focusing plane changes over time. This is, same one. This is very similar to that, okay, except we're not really changing the focus plane. It's just that these things are nicely in focus. These are kind of underexposed and a little blurry and so on, and the quality map nicely reflects it. Okay, these are on frames only. When we do it space-time, this will look a little discontinuous to you, but I'm just displaying this. Remember, we applied this to video clips of length 16. Each one of these is one of those clips. This shows a quality map for each one of those. And we're able to successfully capture the higher quality detail in this thing and on the waves and so on. Lower quality out here, it gets black and so on, where we have these distortions like saturation and so on, and this fogginess and that sort of thing. So we're very happy with how that turns out as well. This one is a little bit harder to follow because everything's moving quickly. There's something called temporal masking happening. So just in trying to see anything and see what's happening, plus it's kind of discontinuous. But so you can see that there is a change in focus that spatially that corresponds to these being sharper and other regions being lower quality. And you can go online and test these out yourself. We've put up a web page where you can download the database for free, all the code, and our CVPR paper. We make all of our databases public immediately, always have. We sort of set the trend for that around the year 2000. Helps popularize these topics. These are my sponsors. I am very thankful for making so many incredible opportunities for students here at UT Austin.